Hi, and welcome to this episode of What's the Risk? In this episode, I want to talk about how we can improve vulnerability management, and this may be in some surprising and very effective ways. So let's get started. Most organizations have some form of vulnerability management. That's the basics, right? That's our zero starting point. Part of what I'm going to talk about is how we want to improve this, because I think we're doing some things wrong and there's quite a bit of area for improvement. And let me kind of walk you through what I mean. This is a typical sequence for vulnerability management, right? So once an organization is of size, 250 people or more, they will have more secure security practices. They will start having more formalized vulnerability management programs. And this is generally the sequence. Patches are released. They will do some minimum testing to see, that these patches aren't going to break anything that we have running operationally. And then they'll get prioritized generally by the CVSS score. Now, the CVSS score is set by the manufacturers, the vendors, whenever the vulnerabilities are found. And those are on a scale of 10 to 0, 10 being critical, 0 or 1 being something that you really don't have to worry about. And so they'll look at the CVS score, patch criticals first. That's what everybody does. Then go for all the very high vulnerabilities. Right? And then someplace in the medium or the moderate vulnerabilities, they kind of run out of steam, they run out of resources, they don't get everything done. So, and most people don't do anything with the informational. The low and the informational vulnerabilities, they don't do anything with those. So let's say 80% of the vulnerabilities are addressed. So we've applied and covered 80%. At that point, generally, there will be user-related questions or issues and other things that kind of supersede the process, and that's usually kind of the end of the sequence. Now, one other thing you could have in the sequence that I don't have is once you've applied the patches, go back and rescan to confirm that the patches took. Sometimes on multiple operating systems, if a patch is applied, sometimes it can affect a previously applied patch. And so depending upon what your systems look like in their configuration, this may or may not be an issue. So some organizations will have that as part of their sequence. But basically, this is the basic sequence, right? Patches come out, we do a minimal testing, make sure they don't break anything. We look at the criticality, boom, apply those, get everything done you can, and move on. Here's the problem with this. We have limited resources, and we're not getting 100% of the vulnerabilities addressed. We're only getting maybe 80. So this is what I would suggest in changing this typical process. Where we have minimal testing, I would recommend analysis. We can keep the testing for what breaks, but the analysis is what's going to help set the priority, and that's going to run the schedule. This is different. I don't know of a lot of places that are doing this. Now, organizations that are of size and larger may have people like me on staff doing this kind of analysis and running, helping to use that to drive the priority. But most organizations are boots on the ground, in the weeds, doing the good work. And they're like, why do I have time to do? I don't have time to do the analysis. It just takes too long. And I've got, 5,000 systems. I don't have time to do that. I got to get stuff patched, right? And that's kind of the mindset. But that's also kind of the problem. Operations staff focus on applying critical CVEs because they can't apply them all. You can't get them all. It just doesn't happen. What happens is they leave a growing repository of medium and low vulnerabilities across the network. Now, maybe we don't care about the lows, but high and medium vulnerabilities, if they're not all being applied, then we have some real issues. Attackers can deeply penetrate a network, move laterally find and exfiltrate data because they can leverage these existing vulnerabilities. This is the impact. This is why this is important. This is what the analysis is trying to address. Get it? Best practices, compliance as we know it today, the typical processes we're following right now just aren't good enough. We're missing this critical component. And generally, organizations don't do this because they don't have tools, they don't know how, nobody's been talking about it, right? So that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you. I wanted to change the paradigm because there's a tremendous amount of improvement to be gained by a little bit of work. This is a better process. Do the analysis to identify the exploitable vulnerabilities. That sets the priority. That's the impact. That's the change we want to make to the process. Vulnerabilities that we're talking about, generally you're going to see in this group are things like missing patches, things that are outdated or unsupported software. You're going to find weak configurations, API flaws. These are the kinds of vulnerabilities that you're going to find. Now, I am going to say this. Weak configurations right here, I hope that you are using hardening guide checks when you're scanning your systems and not just scanning for what's outdated or unsupported or missing patches or known flaws. That's a huge piece. Weakness configuration, a huge piece. Okay. So the goal of vulnerability analysis is to reduce the likelihood of a successful cyber attack by developing business processes for identifying, prioritizing, resolving, and reporting on vulnerabilities. That's the goal of analysis, is to help refine the focus and direct the action. In 2020 alone, there were more than 18,000 vulnerabilities published on the National Vulnerability Database. 18,000. 18,000. And these numbers just increase year after year. And here's a hint. They're not going to decrease anytime soon. It's just going to continue. As software and systems become more complex, the number of vulnerabilities will increase exponentially. I've been doing a lot of work lately in supply chain risk area and other areas, and I can tell you all the statistics across the board are that businesses are headed in this direction. They're leveraging more combinations of vendor support and tools and technologies because the business gets a huge benefit from going in that direction. And the statistics bear that out. Every time they do that, there is substantial income gain, right? So the businesses are going to continue to go this direction. They're not going to get simpler. It's just going to get more complex. Every time we add complexity, risk exponentially goes up because you not only have individual vulnerabilities, but you now have combinations in sequence, and that's something that complexity brings to the table. So that is not going to go away. So if you think you're overwhelmed now, buckle in. It's not going to get any better. The more businesses rely on automation, the more important it is to be able to manage. Vulnerabilities equal risk. It's just that simple. Vulnerabilities equal risk. And the more vulnerabilities we have that we can't eliminate or control or mitigate, the more risk that we have. And that's kind of what's been happening over the years. What are the benefits of doing this kinds of analysis? Well, number one, you're going to reduce outages. You're going to lower the likelihood of a successful cyber attack. You're going to delay or eliminate an attacker's ability to move laterally. That's huge. That's huge. If you can eliminate his ability or her ability, their ability to move laterally or find data or exfiltrate the data, that's huge. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about finding those vulnerabilities, the exploitable vulnerabilities, the ones that will likely be used by an attacker. Eliminate those. The other ones, we don't care so much about. Make sense? Right, okay. How an organization approaches vulnerability management says something about the maturity of their security practices. So small, mid-sized organizations, security practices aren't going to be as mature as we would expect in an older, larger organization. And so with these security practices, as they mature, that's when you normally see this kind of analysis come into a play. An organization is large enough, they have somebody like me on staff, somebody who does this kind of analysis, right? And so that kind of adds to the risk of smaller and mid-sized organizations not having that analysis. Attackers know it, and they take advantage of that. And that's another reason why we're seeing tons of smaller mid-sized businesses under attack in the last 12 months. When an organization reaches a size, let's say 250 employees, 250 assets, laptop servers, something around that size, they can no longer get all the vulnerabilities, critical, high, and moderate, rapidly analyzed or addressed. And so what I'm saying is giving you the ability to rapidly analyze them now allows you to prioritize those that are truly important over trying to patch everything, because that's not going to happen. So the focus of the analysis is looking at key assets, critical data, essential functions, perimeter defense, and those systems that you know are targeted. I would add to this systems within your architecture that are a gateway in and out of your network. Those should all be on your list, whether or not they're part of the perimeter defense. So as you look at the analysis, not when you do the tagging piece, but as you look at the analysis, this is kind of like what you're going to be looking at. The vulnerability analysis builds resilience within the organization by making sure that sufficient protections exist while eliminating vulnerabilities. So analysis equals resilience. Having the ability to perform this kind of analysis, to zero in on what is truly critical to the organization and ensuring that that is properly protected and doesn't have any exploitable vulnerabilities, that builds your resilience. Very important. How the organization prioritizes resources is very close to your risk analysis, and the two should be interlinked. So prioritizing your resources and that risk analysis, this vulnerability analysis, should be really linked one-to-one. So some of the typical considerations you're already probably doing is you're looking at these vulnerabilities, you're going, is that a false positive? Yes or no? Is it going to break my system? Yes or no? So these are some of the typical things that you're probably already doing. And that's a good start, but that's not really what the vulnerability analysis is. It should include and does include a risk analysis component. Most organizations aren't doing this piece, and that's why we're talking about it, that the vulnerability analysis is really a risk analysis. How likely is it that the vulnerability will be leveraged by an attacker against your organization? Can you answer that? Do you know how it would be leveraged against the organization? And what's the potential impact of that exploitation? These are the questions the analysis is designed to help you answer, and to answer it rapidly. Most organizations don't do the analysis, and they leave exploitable vulnerabilities in the network. This is why attacks are successful. A good program has roles across the organization that are involved in vulnerability management, report flows up, tracking and trending, and management goals and priorities flow down in the way of policies and procedures. This is a good vulnerability management program. This is what you want to build into your organization. If you already have that, awesome. We're going to help you make this better. The never-ending cycle is evaluating, prioritizing, reporting. Evaluating, prioritizing, reporting. This is the never-ending cycle that you're already on. What we're going to do is we're going to make this more efficient. So let's talk about the vulnerability analysis piece. There are a couple of steps. You're going to have a list of what are your organizational priorities, right? What is it that the business said is most important to the business? Not from an IT perspective. What's the business say is most important? And then you're going to build around that. You must have your vulnerability data, your scanning capability. You download that data, you pull it up into a spreadsheet, you use it into a commented limited file. You're going to have that vulnerability data to begin doing your analysis with that data. Then step 3, the magic happens. We're going to custom tag it. This is where all the magic happens. This is where the analysis becomes really fast. And that's what the tool does for you, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Then you're going to analyze these things that are exploitable. So the data tagging will pull them out of that blob of data that you have. So you now have the relevant short list of things that you want to look at. Then you're going to analyze them. Now this is where you say, okay, what system is this on? What's the criticality of the system? Is this, does this move to the top of my list? How many vulnerabilities do I have in this area? Do I have more critical vulnerabilities, more exploitable vulnerabilities in this area? Maybe I prioritize all of this group first, right? So you might do it by group, you might do it by the sheer numbers, you might do it by how exploitable it is. This is where you start to do that analysis, making the data relevant to your organization, and then from there, you can produce all the report outputs that you need. Right, so pretty short on this process. Senior leadership should be the one to establish the priorities for protection and response, as well as acceptable levels of risk in a quantified, not qualified manner. So what do I mean by that? Qualified manner says something is a high, medium, or low. Okay, what is that? What does that mean? How many vulnerabilities can I have and still be a medium, right? And how much does a medium risk potentially cost the organization? You can't tell because there are no numbers there. They're just labels. When you quantify it, you have numbers. You know what percentages are. You know what the range of risk is. You can clearly articulate the impact in probability of outage time, systems impacted, dollar amount to the business. That's what quantified analysis means. So if your organization right now is still talking about risk in qualified terms, right? I'm doing a qualitative analysis. You got to switch. You got to get over to a quantified analysis, and you've got to start dealing with hard numbers around risk. SCAP scanner outputs on a monthly, usually monthly, sometimes you do it more frequent. You're going to take that vulnerability data and you're going to pull that into Excel to do your analysis. And there's really 3 fields that you're going to pull out of that data set and drop into the tool. And it's just that simple. As soon as you drop those 3 fields in, it'll execute. The same method that we use in AI for tagging data is basically what we're using here, except this isn't big AI, this is little Excel AI, right? So we're going to use keywords that are known in the exploitable data set. You can also tag by vendor or by software name or other characteristics that might be important to you. So it's very flexible. You're not locked in. You can customize and update it and run it as many times as you want. Some of the keywords focus around denial of service, code execution, privilege escalation, authentication, access control, known exploits. These keywords, these categories, you will find these same categories when you look at any de facto standard for risk and risk modeling. You will find them in the MITRE ATT&CK model. You will find them in OWASP. You will find them in control sets, because these are the areas that are most commonly used in attacks. These are the ways systems get compromised. And so these keywords are derived from experience and interaction of all of those de facto standards, as well as years of working with the vulnerability data itself. The quality vulnerability analysis supports further quantitative analysis. Make sense? So what we're going to do is we're going to estimate the likelihood for successful attack, perimeter or control strengths, and organizational risk and impact. And what we generate here, this kind of quality analysis, right, this vulnerability analysis, will support all of the additional later quantifying analysis. This will become input for other analysis models. Make sense? This will become the input for other things. In Excel, you can use pivot tables and charts to provide rapid analysis of the data that we're going to generate. and use that in your presentation for report. You can use the data tables themselves. They're pretty dense on data. Most managements want something a little more visual, but you can use the data table itself. But I would pull the numbers out of that and then put it in a pivot chart. Take that and chart bar charts, pie charts, color them, do all those nice things. Tag them, right? So you know like what systems or what percentage in the pie chart, things like that. But this activity associates the numbers to these categories, and that is the quantification of the risk. That is the important part, because you're now turning it into these numbers that now represent these categories that we talked about. So let me show you really quick. This is what the model looks like. And what I've done here, just for a quick run through, let me come way up. I've got like 100 rows I've dropped in here. Yeah, like 100 rows that I dropped in here. And you can look at these and you can see these. I used CVE number as my ID number. If you're using a SCAP tool, you might have some other identifier that it uses, like a plugin number, or you can use the CVE number. They'll give you either one of those. It doesn't matter. Whichever one you want to use is relevant. This field is just for your reference. But to look at the dates, you see 2018. This is just a blob of data I pulled off the National Vulnerability Database to do this analysis with. It's just some of those 18,000 vulnerabilities that happen in 2020. So this ID number is one field that you will drop in. The next one is the vulnerability description. I'm going to open this up so you can see this. So this vulnerability description, this is the vulnerability text field, and this is what the vendors write up to describe what this vulnerability is, right? So that's the vulnerability description, and then they'll tell you the severity. Your scanner will give you a count of findings. I just auto-generated and populated some numbers in here so that we have some numbers to look at. The row and number count here you can use if you're doing some other things and referencing with this tool. I just want to show you really quick how it works. So I dropped in like the first 100 and whatever findings, right? And populated them. Now, the way that this works, this will be automatically generated for you up here. Once you drop the data in, it'll calculate that. And what we're going to do is, here's the guts or the engine of the tool. These columns, H through Q, that I'm scrolling over here, these are the work component of the tool. So let me explain how it works. In each of these columns, you can put in a keyword. So in this case, I used the keyword Microsoft. And I didn't find any Microsoft findings in my data set, but there are 72 for the word Cisco. Let's see if there's anything in here for Word. Oh, there's 7 findings for Word. So what it does is for each of these, it looks for that word within the description text. So I can look for Microsoft or Word or Apache, like the Apache server software. Oh, none for Apache. Anything for Excel? Nothing for Excel. I'll go back to Word for that one. 72 for Cisco. DOS stands for denial of service. I can also use keywords like unauthenticated, Internet Explorer, Office. These didn't come up with anything selling. So you can, okay, so malicious use came up with one. Man in the middle didn't come up with anything. Unauthorized has 2, but you see how this works. So exploit has 74. So what I generally do is I'll have a set of keywords that I know I'm going to look for. When I get my vulnerabilities, I might peruse my vulnerabilities first to see what kinds of things I'm finding. So in this one, I have a lot of web-based, so I might want to look, and I've got some cross-site scripting in there I just saw, so I might want to look for XSS, which is cross-site scripting. I might want to look for web-based, that's something else. So you see how that works. You you can very quickly just peruse through your data set to kind of see what the key topics are, drop those in, and immediately it'll tag and you'll know exactly what you've got. And then what it does in the last column is it will concatenate the findings together, make it a nice visual. You've got a comma in between, so it's something that you can use. And then this is basically what the tool does. It gives you some percentages up at the top, and now I can take this set of rows and I can copy this out, drop it into another Excel sheet, pivot these two so I have my words and my numbers in columns instead of as a row, and now I can go pivot table that and do all kinds of charts and beautiful things and make it look gorgeous off of that. So that's basically how the tool works. And you just saw it's lightning fast. I have used this for something like this for a number of years now, and I can tell you that it is the fastest way to reduce your attack surface. And once you see those numbers come down and you've eliminated those numbers don't pop back up because they're not patches. You're dealing with, as we said, vulnerabilities that are weaknesses in configuration, those kinds of weaknesses, not specifically patches. And so that's why I say it's really important that you use your hardening guides when you're looking for your configuration checks, and tighten up what you're scanning for, and then you would do this each time. And as you see, it doesn't take really a lot of time at all to kind of look through and say, oh, I've got some juniper in there. I just saw juniper. So I don't know, how many do I have juniper? Oh, wow, I got a lot, a ton of juniper, right? So, and you just see, as soon as you put it in, and like I have 100 here, you can do 1,000 rows. I've done 5,000 rows at a time, and there's only a momentary pause before it gives you that number back. So this really does not take a lot of time. Okay, so there it is. I wanted to give you an example, show you what this is, why this is so important, why I'm so passionate about it. So excellent. I hope you like it. Check us out online, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.